On the road here. Anybody else do yard work yesterday and get really tired? So that's where I am. I guess it's just me. I did like 3 hours of work outside and I was like, I'm zapped. So I think I'm still paying the price for that. And then it rained and got cool last night. I was like, wow, I see 80 degrees. That's a big deal. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 9. I'll open us in a word of prayer. We'll be in 1 Samuel 9. I do want to flip over to 2 Samuel chapter 12 also here as we get started. But we'll do that in just a second. So glad you're here. Good to be together today. Let's go to God in prayer as we begin. Father, we thank you for this day, for this new week and a new day, and this Lord's Day. I thank you for the church and being here gathered, assembled as believers, as a family of brothers and sisters in Christ. I pray that you bless our gatherings, the classes that are going on in this class, and the worship that will follow. Lord, help us to understand ourselves as Christians and as part of this community in Christ. Lord, be with me now as I lead this hour, and be with us as we open your word. Help us to listen well and to see things that might bless us to be more like Jesus. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right, so if you want to turn, as you keep your finger at 1 Samuel 9, go back to 2 Samuel 12. This is one of those rabbits that I almost chased last week and then thought better of it because we were running out of time. And we had some lively debate, which I really enjoyed, between, it wasn't really that lively, but there was some disagreement whether God always intended for the people to have a king, or if that was a plan B that God did kind of hesitantly, and reluctantly because the people demanded it, and so eventually God capitulated and gave the people what they wanted. And I was just thinking some about the ways that even the plan Bs can, in God's providence and the way that God is able to show mercy, forgive, and give grace, can lead to new life and good. And so one of the little passages that has intrigued me, surprised me, and kind of stuck in my craw, so to speak, is there in 2 Samuel chapter 12 and beginning verse 24. I think most of us, you all know the story about David and Bathsheba, and just that kind of the lowest point probably or one of the several low points, maybe the lowest point of David's life, where he takes another man's wife. He has that man killed so that he can have her to himself, and he goes through all the kind of lying, deception to try to cover it up, and then eventually is convicted by Nathan the prophet of what David has done wrong, and he owns it. But then I think, isn't that relationship between David and Bathsheba from the get-go, it was founded in infidelity and sin and mistakes and deception and all of that. How could something like that ever be good or ever yield anything good? And then in 2 Samuel chapter 12 verse 24, that the first child dies as consequence of what they've done. But then Solomon's born in verse 24. It says, David comforted his wife Bathsheba. He went into her and lay with her, and she bore a son. And he called his name Solomon, and the Lord loved him. And sent a message by David the prophet, and so he called his name Jedediah because of the Lord. And just that little line of the Lord loved him just after all of the just nasty, terrible darkness that we've just read about in this story, all of the mistakes of David, and the child dies, and then the next child that's born, it says God loved that child. It just says something about the short memory of God, we might say, or maybe just the incredible mercy and grace of God, that it was a new day and God moved on. And David and Bathsheba could move on. And, maybe there's a tension there that we have to wrestle with that, I'd hate to say something like, well, it all worked out in the end, or it wasn't that big of a deal, or what David did wasn't really that bad, or something like that. We wouldn't want to go there. But just to say, no, God's grace does continue and give us new life, even as we can't change the past. I think in some ways, in my mind, that tied in with the idea of the king, that even if it hadn't been God's initial plan to give the people a king, and even if there's kind of this, it kind of started off on a bad foot of like, this is a mistake, the people are making a mistake, doesn't mean that God couldn't do something beautiful and good through the king. That makes sense? So, one person nodded, so that was good. Yes?
I think of Joseph and how he tells his brothers that they meant things for evil, but God used them for good.
Yeah, that's right. So it boggles our minds to think about both of those happening or operating at the same time, how badness can happen and by bad people, and yet somehow God is working in that, using that in some ways. Yeah, thank you, Mark. Any other comments on that before we jump into chapter 9? I'm going to give my voice. I've breathed in a lot of dry dust, grass particles yesterday, so that's what's going on here. David. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we do the things that God lets us do it just to teach us.
Yeah. And hopefully we grow and we learn as we move forward. But I do think there's a temptation for us to live in the past, to regret our mistakes, to get hung up on those, I wish it could have turned out differently. I wish this would have happened. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish, and then our lives become so defined and just weighted down with that. And I think we get little glimpses of the way that, those two things can be true at the same time, to kind of tie in with Gwen's article that she wrote on the bulletin this week. But yeah, we can grieve our sins, but that doesn't mean that God doesn't also open a new day to us in mercy and forgiveness. Yeah. I saw David's hand back there.
Yeah, I think in Ben's class we were studying the fact that through bad things, good things happen. Through David, Christ came, through Christ,
Yeah.
death on
Yeah.
the cross, it's our salvation.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Very good. All right, well, let's turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 9. And I'll go ahead and admit that this is a little challenging to teach because it's such a kind of interesting little narrative that is about Saul and what I would call a quest that Saul is on that he doesn't know that he's on as he follows or looks for his father's donkeys and ends up kind of give away the ending here, running into Samuel and being anointed as king because his dad sent him to look for the donkeys. So there's this quest, and maybe the thing that we can look for as we go through this story is to see the hand of God through this. I think that's kind of the interesting layer of it, of how many times do we see God's providence at work, how God is confirming through other people what God is doing with Saul and in Saul's life. So what seems to be at one time on one hand, accidental, donkeys are lost, and kind of every day, God is doing something of incredible significance. So let's begin, and then we'll read a portion of this and go back through and talk about it. And as always, I really appreciate your interactions and comments. All right, verse 1 of 1 Samuel chapter 9. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, son of Aphiah, a Benjaminite, a man of wealth. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Now the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. And so Kish said to Saul, his son, "Take one of the young men with you, arise and go and look for the donkeys." And he passed through the hill country of Ephraim and passed through the land of Shalishah, but they did not find them. And they passed through the land of Shalem, but they were not there. And then they passed through the land of Benjamin, but did not find them. When they came to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant who was with him, "Come, let us go back, lest my father cease to care about the donkeys and become anxious about us." But he said to him, "Behold, there is a man of God in this city, and he is a man who is held in honor. All that he says comes true. So now let us go there. Perhaps he can tell us the way we should go." And then Saul said to his servant, "But if we go, what can we bring the man? For the bread in our sacks is gone, and there is no present to bring to the man of God. What do we have?" And the servant answered Saul again, "Here I have with me 1/4 of a shekel of silver, and I will give it to the man of God to tell us our way." Formerly in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, he said, "Come, let us go to the seer," for today's prophet was formerly called a seer. And Saul said to his servant, "Well said, come, let us go." And so they went to the city where the man of God was. So we'll pause there. So yeah, just this little story about Saul's quest to find these donkeys, which is just interesting little narrative that we have here. And one of the things that always interests me about these stories is why did the Spirit who inspired the author of this find it so important to give us so much information here, right? Might have been one of the things that could have been summarized of like, okay, Saul became king, rather than, I'm going to tell you how this happened, right? He was looking after the donkeys. And so we're on this with him. Just notice, we said this last week as we rounded out chapter 8. You have this great exit of all characters cast at the end of chapter 8. The Lord, look at verse 22. The Lord said to Samuel, "Obey their voice and make them a king." And Samuel then said to the men of Israel, "Go every man to his city." So it's like the stage is being cleared for the second act. You get that sense where they've had this meeting and Samuel's like, "We don't need a king." And the people said, "No, we need a king." And God says, "Don't worry, they didn't reject you, they reject me." And then Samuel says, "Okay, we'll have a king," and everybody leave. And so the stage kind of clears here and gets ready for this next act. And then we see that signaled again in verse 1 where it says, "There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish." I kind of expect that to say Saul, but it's Saul's dad, Kish. But look back at chapter 1 and verse 1, how the story begins, or that first part that we'd say, this is the book of, I was going to say the book of Eli, but I think that's a movie, isn't it? Denzel comes to mind. Okay. No, this is the section about Eli, right? From chapters 1 to 7 or 1 to 8. But there it says, there was a certain man of, now I have to pronounce this word again that I thought I would never have to pronounce again, Ramathaim Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah. And in this new section in chapter 9, you have a kind of similar feel, don't you? It says, now there was a man of, right? So I think that's interesting as we're signaled, hey, this is kind of a new chapter, right? A new chapter as we move from Eli and Samuel into this king that's God's going to give his people. All right. All right, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish. So what tribe is Saul from? Yeah, Benjamin. Good. Y'all are good Bible. That's a good little Bible study question to ask. Do you remember what this is King Saul, Saul of Tarsus. Jeff, do you know what tribe Saul of Tarsus was from? You do. Good. All right. Now moving on. I like that. He's from the tribe of Benjamin, right? He's a Benjaminite. So Saul and Saul. That's just good to tuck away in your brain. So son of Kish, and here's some relatives: Abiel, Zeror, Becheroth, son of Aphiah, Benjaminite, a man of wealth. So Saul's family, Saul comes from some affluence, right? Some a more wealthy, more powerful family. He had a son, this man Kish, whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Now, it's kind of interesting if handsomeness and height go together. How many of y'all think that those two always go together? Yeah, Grayson does. That's awesome. So glad you're here. It's maybe those are just two different things. Like a man of stature, height, of someone who's tall and kind of looms a little bit, puts some intimidation in you, or handsomeness, appearance. So maybe that's an extension of the handsomeness. Maybe it's just something different. They do seem to be presented together here. So we've got 3 clues about Saul: that he comes from a family of means, he's handsome, and he's tall. What do you think that signals to us as Saul is being presented here? What do you think the point is, Carol?
I think one of the points is that he would appeal to the people.
Yeah.
But not necessarily the kind of person that would appeal to God.
Okay.
So there might be a negative there too.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's right. So humanly speaking, we all have ideas of what certain people or things would look like. And if you thought of what would the ideal king look like, it would be Saul, right? I mean, somebody who comes from some wealth and power, a family who's like what's the word? Averse in that? No, wow. That yard work yesterday is doing me in. Someone who knows that world very well. Someone who looks like a king. And you almost, you think about the people's demand for a king. Do you think that God chose Saul to give the people the kind of king they wanted? Maybe that's part of your point, Carol, of not only do they want a king, which may or may not be God's will to give them a king, but they want a certain kind of king, a kind of king that feels like the king that they want. And maybe that's who Saul is, like tall and handsome and comes from a family of wealth, as opposed to wanting a king, which may or may not have been God's will, but wanting a king, hey, if we have a king, we want it to be a man of God. We want it to be somebody after God's own heart, right? And so God has to correct that path later on. But here, God is giving them a king and giving them kind of this ideal king, kind of irrespective of God's will. And a king, not just like the other nations, which is what they wanted, but a king that's proper to who God's people ought to be. Yeah, Andrew?
It strikes me that Saul, though coming from a wealthy family, but in the end he has to bum the money for the visit off his servant.
Right.
Which means he wasn't prepared for the length that it may take, whatever this hunt for the donkeys.
Yeah.
Because they were almost out of food. He wouldn't have had money for that either.
Yeah.
It strikes me as a personality flaw.
Yeah. And we know he had some. And it is, On one hand, it seems like the story presents Saul very favorably. I mean, saying he stood out, and you'd see him and you think, now that's a king. But then there's these little clues that we get about him that they kind of undermine that picture, or they almost like poke fun at him in a way, right? To show that incompetence or show that character flaw that we think, okay, what's really going on here? So, yeah, keen insight. Thank you for that. All right. Yeah, Mark.
I also think it's interesting how Jacob promises his children that the kings or the scepter will be the tribe of Judah. So that's another thing that's like, he's from Benjamin. He's like,
Right.
looks good. So,
Yeah.
you want a king, so I'm going to give you.
Great. Yeah, that's a great insight. And so, yeah, if you're really, and wow, that word, I think it's the same word I'm trying to think of that I can't. If you're saturated in the stories of Scripture and you see that Saul's from this other tribe, there would be a bit of a dissonance there, right? You'd think, that maybe that's not quite right. There's some gap there of what had been promised and what we're getting with Saul. All right, so outwardly he's the king. He's king material, but then we're going to see that maybe inwardly less so. All right, now the donkeys of Kish. So what a turn, right? So here's this Saul. Let's give you a brief description of him, but then we have now the donkeys of Kish. Saul's father were lost. Okay, so this is where we find ourselves. Kish said to Saul his son, "Take one of the young men with you and arise and look for the donkeys." When we meet David later, what is he doing?
He's a shepherd of sheep.
Yeah, he's shepherd, and isn't he with this sheep when they're going through the brothers and he's not there, right? The 7 other brothers. So he's with the animals too. I don't know if there's any connection there of here we have the king Saul who's looking for animals, and then we have David who's with the sheep, a different animal. Maybe there's something there, but so that's where Saul is going to be. Take one of the young men with you. So this would have been some kind of servant. Again, the family has some means, and so they've got servants. One of the young men, arise, go look for the donkeys. And so he passed through the hill country of Ephraim and passed through the land of Shalishah, and they did not find them. And they passed through the land of Shalem, but they were not there. And they passed through the land of Benjamin. They could not find them. In other words, they're looking everywhere for these donkeys, and they cannot find them, right? So they look high, they look low. And when they came to the land of Zuph, or Zuph, I don't know the best way to say that. Don, how would you say that? Zuph, okay. So I said it right. Saul said to his servant, "Come, let us go back, lest my father cease to care about the donkeys and become anxious about us." So there's some awareness there of, look, my dad sent us to look for these animals, but if we don't come home, my dad's going to, not worry about these animals as much as he's going to worry about us. So I think there's some wisdom there. And we hear that line repeated later in the chapter. So tuck that into your brain there. So become anxious about us. But he said to him, verse 6, this is the servant. So Andrew, this connects to, I think, back to this, the irony here of the servant who's got money. But the servant says, "Behold, there's a man of God in this city. He's a man who's held in honor, and all that he says comes true. Perhaps he can tell us the way that we should go." And so it seems like you almost get the feeling that Saul doesn't know about Samuel. Don't you get that feeling? Like it's the servant who has to say to him, "There's a man of God here who might be able to help us." It's not Saul who says to the servant, "I know about this area, and there's a man of God around who might be able to help us with this." It's the servant who says it to Saul, as if Saul is just not aware of Samuel's existence even. Now, we don't know for sure, but it does seem like that might be a possibility, right? So there's a man of God in this city. So they're in the very place where that man of God is. And let's go there. Maybe he can tell us the way that we should go. All right, so then Saul said to his servant, "But if we go, what can we bring the man? For the bread in our sacks is gone. There's no present to bring the man. What do we have?" It seems like there's some kind of like admission fee here, right? Or maybe it was, if it wasn't like required, maybe it was a gift, a courtesy that you would bring to inquire of this prophet. Not just come empty-handed and expect, hey, do something for us, but bring a gift and, receive some help. So Saul at least knows that and says, look, we're out of stuff. I don't have anything. The servant said in verse 8 to Saul, "Here I have with me a quarter of a shekel of silver, and I'll give it to the man of God to tell us our way." So there it is, the servant who has to pay Saul's way to go see the seer. Now, verse 9, my verse 9 is in parentheses. Is your verse 9 in parentheses there? You see it? Which is interesting to put this parenthesis here in verse 9, right in the middle of this story. It says, formerly in Israel. It's almost like a footnote. Maybe they didn't know how to use footnotes, but it seems like this would have been a good footnote. Formerly in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, he said, "Come, let us go to the seer, for today's prophet was formerly called a seer." So whenever this book is being written, circulated, and read, Samuel, with this kind of its first audience, not us, but its first audience, they would have called the seer a prophet, but they're talking back to the times of these events, saying back in this day, the prophet was called a seer. Does that make sense? And so that change in language had already shifted. Which makes you wonder, when did this book get, who's reading this and how many years from these events were these things written down? Anyway, one of the effects of that, though, is, before we get to one of the effects of the parenthetical comment, Grant has something to say. Go ahead, Grant. Okay.
And then when he talks about seeing a prophet, it's about the money. And he seems like he's chasing money.
Yeah.
Where David is in a shepherd. He's taking care of the sheep and he's looking after them, making sure that they're healthy, they get fed and watered, and that's what he's doing.
Yeah, and they're not lost, right? So he's already got them. But yeah, that is an interesting distinction between not just different animals, but different things happening with those animals. And Saul seems to be focused on, the money that they represent. Mm.
That, to me, shows that this same kind of thinking, it's all about now undone.
Oh, yeah.
Going to God, even when he's service, let's go talk to the prophet.
Yeah, and some of those character flaws that we see in Saul, they're made clearer by what happens later, and we kind of read that back in. I mean, it's hard not to read some of this, and if we didn't know anything about Saul, we may give him the benefit of the doubt, but since we know how he departed from the way of the Lord and was rejected by God here in just a few chapters, how we read that into these stories and say, oh yeah, look at these little details that actually end up being greater character flaws. Well, then verse 9, so in parentheses, is kind of an odd, a little note here that the author found important for us to know, but it also delays the response as we read this. It delays Saul's response a little bit to say, oh, what are they going to do? Just a little bit, keeps you interested of like, okay, we're waiting on the answer, and rather than giving it right away, we get this note about change in vocabulary from prophet to seer. And then we get in verse 10, and Saul said to his servant, "Well said, come, let us go." I like that response. "Well said, come, let us go." And so they went to the city where the man of God was. All right, so in verse 11, let me read another section and then we'll walk back through it. Verse 11 and following. And they went up to the hill country. They went up to the hill. They went up the hill. Let me start this again. And they went up the hill to the city. They met young women coming out to draw water and said to them, "Is the seer here?" They answered, "He is. Behold, he is just ahead of you. Hurry, he has come just now to the city because the people have a sacrifice today on the high place. And as soon as you enter the city, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat, for the people will not eat until he comes, since he must bless the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited will eat. Now go up, for you will meet him immediately." And so they went up to the city, and as they were entering the city, they saw Samuel coming out toward them on his way up to the high place. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed to Samuel, verse 16, "Tomorrow about this time I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines. For I have seen my people because their cry has come to me." And when Samuel saw Saul, verse 17. All right, Samuel saw Saul, and the Lord had told him, "Here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall restrain my people." Restrain my people. And then Saul approached Samuel in the gate and said, "Tell me, where is the house of the seer?" And Samuel answered, "Saul, I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place. For today you shall eat with me, and in the morning I will let you go and will tell you all that is on your mind. As for your donkeys, they were lost 3 days ago. Do not set your mind upon them, for they have been found. And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for your father's house?" Saul answered, "Am I not a Benjaminite from the least of the tribes of Israel? And is my clan the humblest of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then have you spoken to me in this way?" All right, we'll pause there and go back. I did mean one thing that occurred to me as I was reading that, just as I got started. Back in verse 8, there's an expression that's used of Samuel, the man of God. Do you remember where we saw that expression in Samuel? Those of you who've been with us. That's used one other time in Samuel, and we've come across it already. It wasn't about Samuel that time. The man of God. Okay, it's back in chapter. You only have 8 chapters to guess from, so because we haven't gone very long. It's in chapter 2. Yeah, the man who went to see Eli. And verse 27, there came a man of God to Eli. And that's when the prophecy comes to Eli that God is rejecting you. And we're not given the name or any really background information of this man of God. It's just a man of God, somebody that God sends to speak his word. And so that's the reputation of Samuel for the servant of Kish and Saul, is that Samuel is this man of God. So I found that interesting. I thought maybe y'all would too. So back in chapter 2 is the other occurrence of that phrase. So they went to the city. They met young women coming out to draw water, and they asked, "Is the seer here?" Do y'all think there's any significance there of that word seer, by the way? I know the note just said, well, that's what they used to call the prophets, but there's a bit of a difference in, even if it refers to the same office or function, just the word seer may help us think a little differently about this person who's a prophet. Okay, they could tell the future, right? Yes, yes.
Maybe one was someone the people went to for information. The other was someone God sent with the message.
Okay, okay, yeah.
To
Well-
me, it implies that somebody who sees things that the rest
Yeah,
of us don't,
that's right.
because we're looking at the material world and
Yeah.
looking beyond.
Yeah, good, good. Yeah, a seer, someone who sees what, we're all seers because, well, most of us who have eyesight, we see. But yeah, God and God's, the one that God sends, sees in a way that we don't see, understands things that others do not understand. Yeah, someone special, someone set aside. Yeah, Jackie.
It may not have anything to do with it, but later, all the mediums and all the seers were either killed or made to leave. But Saul still seeks one out
Mm-hmm.
to find Samuel.
Yeah, yep.
I'm sure there's referring to a different kind.
Yeah, different. They serve a different power, right, than God's seers. You see later in what we just read, if you skip down to verse 16, God says that he had seen his people because of their cry, right? So God is, I don't know, maybe there's not a connection there. But God is the one who sees and truly sees. And then his prophet that's sent by him is one who sees and communicates what God has told him to communicate. All right, so the seer there. Verse 12. He is, behold, he is just ahead of you. Hurry! So this kind of speeds up the story a little bit, gives us some push in the back, says, hurry, let's go. He's come just now to the city because the people have a sacrifice today on the high place. So as we're reading this, thinking about not just what is happening kind of accidentally, but the providence of God, here's one more thing, right, that happens just right in the story, and that is when Saul and his servant come into this place, Samuel is there. In fact, he just got there. So had they been a day earlier, they would have missed him, right? And maybe they would have waited for him, but who knows, if they would have known when he was going to show up. They say, well, we tried, we'll go home, lest my father worries more about me than the donkeys. But there he just showed up. And so the timing is perfect. So God is working. All right, verse 13. As soon as you enter the city, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat until he comes, since he must bless the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited to eat. The idea of the high places here, what does that remind us of, or what does that indicate? The high places.
Isn't that where they made altars to the other gods?
Yeah.
Offered sacrifice?
Yeah, it sounds like in kind of Old Testament language, if you talk about the high places, this was the places of worship where the people worshipped idols, where the people, yeah.
Because, they went up on the mountain to worship God.
Yeah, they went up to the mountain to worship God, so they worshipped on. But that actual expression, high places, it does kind of bring into our minds, ooh, there's something not good here. They're worshiping like the people of the land worship. Carol?
It also reminds us that probably at this time the temple or tabernacle of Shiloh had been destroyed, and Solomon had not built the temple in Jerusalem yet, so they were maybe missing a little something.
Yeah.
So they had to make do.
Right.
So the Lord took care of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, here's a question to ponder, do you think this worshiping at the high place here in this story, does that signal something sinful that Samuel, I'm seeing how many S's I can use, does that signal something sinful that Samuel is doing? I couldn't think of another S. What do you think? Do you think it's like, oh, there's something tainted here? Or do you think it's just, no, this is just what they're doing. They didn't have any other options. after all, it's Samuel, who's a good guy. What do you think? Any thoughts on that? Yeah.
The term high places, as I understand it, is just a term of place of worship. They were typically set on tops of hills because you wanted to be as close to the deity as possible. When it's referring to the worship of Baal at high places, I mean, they were high places too, but they were specifically delineated by who's being worshipped. So Samuel here, this place at least is consecrated to God because they're having the sacrifice and the feast at a high place.
Yeah. Yeah, so for you, it's not tainted. It's perfectly acceptable here.
It's just a term of, this is a place of worship.
Worship, yeah.
Now, who you're worshiping there, that's another story.
Okay. Good. Yeah. And then Mark.
There was a couple of things that kind of stood out to me. One, that it shows a couple of things about Saul. That he's, the fact he couldn't find the donkeys tells me he doesn't have very good attention to detail. You can't follow a herd of donkeys, and any outdoorsman who's tracked animals at all. You have a herd of donkeys would lead a trail that would be unmistakable. And so he searched for days and hadn't even found the trail on donkeys.
Yeah.
And then he gets to this in verse 13 here. We see that the ladies here are giving him some information. Again, his lack of attention to detail. They won't even eat up there until Samuel gets up there to bless that meal and that sacrifice. And this is something that's going to cost Saul dearly in a very short time.
Right.
It's going to cost him his kingship.
Yeah.
And they're giving him a clue right here.
Right.
These people won't even eat until he shows up.
Yeah.
But we know a little bit later that Saul is not very patient, and he's going to want to do what he wants to do, and it's going to cost him his kingship.
Yep. Well said, and maybe a kind of foreshadowing of sorts, or a clue of, they say that, and it apparently did not stick with Saul. Of look, everybody waits, everybody defers, and Saul in just a few chapters is going to, say, I don't need to. So, yeah, lack of attention to detail. Mark Lane, did you have? No, okay. I thought I saw your hand. All right, so yeah, I don't think this is presented in such a way that shows, the high places is something that Samuel is partaking of, and kind of that syncretism of mixing the faith of the true God with idolatry. And so I don't know. We don't really get that clue in this story. I think this is just kind of assumed. This is where they worshipped, and it was okay. That's my take, but you can have your own take, as I would encourage. All right, so verse, where were we? People will not eat till he comes. Go up, you will meet him immediately. So there's this pressing urgency here. Verse 14, so they went up to the city, and as they were entering the city, they saw Samuel coming out toward them to pass on his way up to the high place. So they're just in time, right? Like he just walked out the door, and he's headed that way, and they just run into him. So all of this is lining up just the time-wise perfectly, which again shows how God had been orchestrating this appointment. So verse 15, we're out of time. Okay. All right, so we'll pick up there next week. But again, I would encourage us as we read this and think about this kind of accidental, almost silly narrative of they're chasing these donkeys, trying to find them. Just the clues we get to see how God had been working and setting all of this up to make this come together for Saul, to lead him to Samuel and to anoint him as king. So thank you all again for your participation today. We'll take about a 15-minute break and be back in here for worship at 10.